The rain came down hard that Tuesday evening, turning the streets into rivers of gray water. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter, but it didn't help much. He was already soaked through to his shirt. His phone buzzed in his pocket with another notification he didn't want to read. Probably his landlord again, asking about the rent he couldn't pay. 32 years old, and this is where life had brought him. 3 weeks ago, he'd lost his job at the marketing firm. Budget cuts, they said. Last one hired, first one fired. It was the third time in 2 years he'd heard those words. Before that, his girlfriend had left, taking most of the furniture and his confidence with her. And now the eviction notice sat on his kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. He had until the end of the month. Daniel cut through Riverside Park to avoid the main streets. Fewer people to see him like this, wet and defeated. The park was empty except for a few pigeons huddled under the bandstand. Even they had more shelter than he felt he had right now. That's when he saw it. Under one of the old wooden benches, something white caught his eye. At first he thought it was just trash. Lord knows the park had plenty of that. But something made him stop. Maybe it was because he had nowhere else to be. Maybe it was because when you're at rock bottom, even curiosity feels like a luxury. He bent down and pulled it out. An envelope, old and yellowed, but sealed inside a clear plastic bag. The kind you'd use to protect something important. The address on the front was too smudged to read. Just blue ink that had run together into an unreadable blur. But someone had tried hard to preserve this. Daniel looked around the empty park. No one was coming to claim it. He slipped it inside his jacket to keep it dry and headed home. His apartment felt colder than the rain outside. The heating had been spotty for weeks, and he'd stopped complaining about it. What was the point when he'd be gone soon anyway? He made himself instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt paper, and sat at his small kitchen table. The envelope wasn't sealed with glue. Someone had used tape, old yellowed tape that peeled away easily. Inside was a letter, handwritten on lined notebook paper. The date at the top made his eyebrows rise. 15 years ago. This letter had been sitting in that park for 15 years. He started reading. To whoever finds this, I'm writing this on the worst day of my life, but I'm leaving it here with hope that maybe someday it might help someone else. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. The letter went on. The writer, a woman named Catherine, described losing everything in what felt like a single month. Her daughter had been taken away in a custody battle she couldn't afford to fight properly. Her job disappeared when the company went bankrupt. Her apartment was gone because she couldn't make rent. She was writing this letter from a friend's couch, the same friend who would ask her to leave 3 days later. Daniel's coffee grew cold as he read. It was like reading his own life, just written by someone else years before he'd lived it. But then the letter changed. Catherine wrote that she wasn't writing this to complain or to ask for pity. She was writing it as a promise to herself. A contract with the universe, she called it. She laid out a plan, specific and detailed, of how she was going to climb out of the hole she'd fallen into. Step 1. Get any job within 3 days. Any job at all, no matter how small or how far below her qualifications. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, she wrote. Money coming in, even a little, was better than none at all. Step 2. Save every single penny possible. Even if it was just coins from tips or change from the sidewalk. She'd watched a documentary once about how small amounts add up over time. She was going to test that theory. Step 3. Reconnect with one person every week who she'd lost touch with or pushed away. Isolation, she wrote, was the enemy of recovery. Humans need humans even when they don't feel like they deserve them. Step 4. Learn one new skill that genuinely interested her. Not for a job or for money, but for herself. Something that would remind her that she was still a person with interests and capabilities beyond just surviving. Step 5. And she underlined this twice. Help one stranger every single day, even in the smallest way. Hold a door. Give directions. Smile at someone who looks sad. She wrote that when you feel worthless, helping others reminds you that you have value to give. Daniel read the list 3 times, then 4, then he lost count. The letter ended with a simple paragraph. I'm hiding this letter here in this park where I used to bring my daughter to feed the ducks. I don't know if I'll make it through this. I don't know if these steps will work, but I'm going to try. And if someone finds this years from now, I hope you know that whatever you're going through, you're not alone. Someone else has been there too. And maybe, just maybe, they made it out. It wasn't signed. Just the name Catherine and a small hand-drawn heart. Daniel sat back in his chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The street lights flickered on, casting orange shadows across his kitchen wall. He thought about his own situation. The eviction notice, the empty bank account, the phone he was afraid to answer, the brother he hadn't spoken to in 3 years because of some stupid argument he could barely remember now, the crushing weight of waking up every morning with nowhere to go and nothing to do. What did he have to lose by trying Catherine's plan? The question sat in his mind like a stone. He'd tried everything else, hadn't he? The endless job applications that went nowhere. The networking events where he felt like a fraud. The self-help books that made him feel worse. The motivational videos that pumped him up for an hour before reality crashed back in. This was different. This wasn't some guru selling a system or some influencer preaching positivity. This was a real person who had been in a real hole, writing real steps she was going to take. No promises of quick fixes or miracle changes, just simple doable actions. Daniel stood up and walked to his bedroom. He found an old notebook in his desk drawer, left over from a job that felt like a lifetime ago. He opened it to a clean page and wrote Catherine's 5 steps word for word, exactly as she'd written them. Then he added a 6th line of his own. Start tomorrow. No excuses. He set his alarm for 6 in the morning, earlier than he'd woken up in weeks. Tomorrow he'd start with step 1. Any job, she'd said. He'd hit every restaurant, every store, every business within walking distance. His car had been repossessed last month, so walking it would have to be. That night, Daniel slept better than he had in months. Not because his problems had disappeared. They were all still there, waiting for him in the morning. But because for the first time in a long time, he had a plan that felt real. Not a fantasy of winning the lottery or landing his dream job. Just simple steps, one after another, written by someone who understood what it felt like to be exactly where he was. As he drifted off, he wondered about Catherine. Where was she now? Had her plan worked? Had she gotten her daughter back? Did she ever think about the letter she'd left in that park 15 years ago? He had no way of knowing. But somehow, across time and distance, her words had found their way to him on the exact day he needed them most. That had to mean something. It had to. The alarm went off at 6, and Daniel's first instinct was to hit snooze. His second instinct was to turn it off completely and go back to sleep. But then he saw the notebook on his bedside table, open to the page where he'd copied Catherine's plan. Get any job within 3 days, he read out loud to his empty room. He got up. By 7:30, Daniel was showered, dressed in his least wrinkled button-down shirt, and walking down Main Street. The morning air was cold and clean after yesterday's rain. The city was waking up, shop owners unlocking doors, delivery trucks making their rounds, early commuters grabbing coffee before work. His pride took its first hit at the diner on 3rd Avenue. It was the kind of place with plastic-covered menus and a rotating pie case by the register. A help-wanted sign hung in the window, handwritten on cardboard. Daniel had walked past this place 100 times and never once thought about working there. The manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely looked up when he asked about the job. Can you wash dishes? Yes, Daniel said. Can you start today? He hesitated for only a second. Yes, 4 to close, 6 days a week. $8.50 an hour. You'll smell like grease and your hands will be raw. Still interested? Every part of him wanted to say no. He had a college degree. He'd managed marketing campaigns for major brands. He'd worn suits to work and had his own office. This was washing dishes in a diner for barely above minimum wage. But Catherine's words echoed in his head. Your ego is not your friend when you're drowning. I'll take it, he said. The manager finally looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. Okay, be here at 4. Don't be late. Daniel walked out of that diner feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Not pride exactly, more like purpose. He had somewhere to be at 4 o'clock. Someone was expecting him. It was small, but it was something. He kept walking and applied at 6 more places before noon. A grocery store that needed baggers, a coffee shop looking for early morning help, a bookstore that wanted weekend staff. He filled out applications and left his phone number, and didn't let himself think about what his old co-workers would say if they could see him now. By the time 4 o'clock came around, Daniel's feet hurt and his stomach was growling. He'd spent the day walking and applying for jobs, and he'd forgotten to eat lunch. But he showed up at the diner exactly on time. The work was hard, harder than he'd expected. Dishes came in faster than he could wash them. The water was too hot, the soap too harsh. His back ached from standing. The noise from the kitchen was constant, clanging and shouting and the hiss of the fryer. By the time the diner closed at 11, his hands were red and wrinkled, and he smelled exactly like the manager had warned. But he'd done it. Day 1, step 1. He had a job. The next morning, Daniel pulled out the letter again and read step 5. Help one stranger every day, even in the smallest way. He'd missed that yesterday, too focused on the job hunt. Today would be different. At the bus stop on his way to the library to use their computers for job searching, an elderly man struggled with his grocery bags. Daniel helped him carry them to his apartment building 2 blocks away. The man tried to give him $5. Daniel refused. Just pass it on, Daniel said, surprised by how good the words felt coming out of his mouth. At the library, he held the door for a young mother wrestling a stroller and 2 toddlers. She gave him a grateful smile that stayed with him for hours. These were small things. Tiny things. The kind of things he used to do without thinking before life had beaten him down so far that he'd stopped noticing other people's struggles. But now, doing them on purpose with intention, they felt different. They felt like proof that he was still capable of being useful, even when he felt useless. Step 3 came that evening. Reconnect with one person every week who he'd lost touch with. Daniel stared at his phone for 20 minutes before he finally pulled up his brother's number. They hadn't spoken in 3 years. The fight had been stupid. Something about money Daniel had borrowed and paid back late. Words had been said. Pride had been wounded. And then silence, stretching on until it felt too awkward to break. He typed and deleted 5 different text messages before settling on something simple. Hey, I know it's been a long time. I'm sorry about how things ended. I miss you. He hit send before he could change his mind. The 3 dots indicating his brother was typing appeared almost immediately. Daniel's heart hammered. I miss you too. Been thinking about reaching out for months but didn't know how. Coffee sometime? Daniel had to read the message 3 times to believe it. They made plans for Saturday morning. The days started to form a rhythm. Wake up early. Job search in the morning. Work at the diner from 4 to close. Help at least one person each day. Save every penny he could. That last part was harder than he expected. After his first week at the diner, he got his paycheck. Less than $300 after taxes. He looked at the numbers and felt the familiar weight of hopelessness settling back in. What difference would $300 make against the mountain of debt he owed? But he thought about Catherine's words. Small amounts add up over time, so he took the check to the bank and deposited every cent. He'd figure out food some other way. The diner let him eat the mistakes and the food that was about to go bad. It wasn't much, but it was something. Step 4 was learn a new skill. Daniel had always been interested in coding, but never had the time to really dive into it. Now, in the strange hours between morning and his diner shift, he started working through free online courses, Python basics, HTML and CSS, JavaScript fundamentals. It was frustrating at first. His brain felt rusty, like machinery that had been sitting idle too long. But there was something satisfying about solving a coding problem, watching the screen do exactly what he told it to do. In a life that felt out of control, this small pocket of logic and order was comforting. 2 weeks in, something strange started happening. Daniel realized he was thinking about Catherine's letter less and less, not because it wasn't important, but because the steps had become automatic. He didn't have to remind himself to help someone or to save his money. He just did it. The manager at the diner, whose name was Rita, started giving him more responsibilities. Prepping vegetables, taking out trash, eventually, helping with simple cooking tasks when they were short-staffed. You're reliable, she said one night as they were closing up. You'd be surprised how rare that is. Coffee with his brother that Saturday was awkward at first. 3 years of silence sat between them like a wall, but slowly, carefully, they started talking. Not about the fight, not at first. Just about life. His brother had gotten married. Daniel had missed the wedding. That hurt, but his brother admitted he'd almost called a dozen times to invite him, but pride had stopped him. Pride's a stupid thing to let ruin a family, his brother said. Daniel thought about Catherine's words again. Pride is a luxury you can't afford when you're drowning. Yeah, Daniel agreed. It really is. They made plans to meet again the following week. Small steps. A month after finding the letter, Daniel got a call from the coffee shop he'd applied to. They wanted him for morning shifts, 6 to noon, 5 days a week. It paid $1 more per hour than the diner, and it wouldn't conflict with his evening schedule. 2 jobs. It would be exhausting, but it would also be double the money. He took it. The days became a blur of work and learning and small acts of kindness. He helped a stranded driver with a flat tire. He bought a homeless woman a sandwich. He let someone go ahead of him in line at the grocery store when they only had a few items. Tiny things that cost him almost nothing but seemed to matter to the people receiving them, and every single penny he made went into the bank. After 6 weeks, he'd saved almost $2,000. It wasn't enough to pay off his debts or find a new apartment, but it was enough to prove that Catherine's plan wasn't just words on paper. It was working. At night before bed, Daniel would take out the letter and read it again. He'd memorized it by now, every word. But something about holding the actual paper, seeing Catherine's handwriting, reminded him that this was real. Someone had been where he was and had found their way out, but he still wondered about her. Who was she? Where was she now? Had she gotten her daughter back? Had her life turned around the way she'd hoped? The questions nagged at him more and more. The letter had changed his life, but it was also a mystery with no ending. Catherine had left these instructions 15 years ago and disappeared into time. For all Daniel knew, she might not have made it. The thought haunted him. One night, unable to sleep, he sat up and really looked at the letter for the first time as a puzzle to solve, rather than just words to follow. There had to be clues. A name, a date, something that could help him find her. Catherine. No last name. The letter was 15 years old. She'd had a daughter she lost custody of. She'd lived somewhere near Riverside Park because that's where she used to bring her daughter to feed the ducks. It wasn't much, but it was something. Daniel opened his laptop and started searching. He had no idea if he'd find anything. He had no idea if Catherine even wanted to be found. But the letter had given him direction when he had none. The least he could do was try to thank her. The search began. Finding someone with only a first name and a 15-year-old letter felt impossible. But Daniel had learned something important over the past 2 months. Impossible just meant it would take longer. He started with the basics. Every night after his shifts, he'd spend an hour searching online. Catherine plus the city name plus various combinations of words from the letter. Custody battle, bankruptcy, Riverside Park. The results were overwhelming and useless. Thousands of Catherines, none of them the right one. The public library became his research headquarters on his days off. The librarian, an older man named George, noticed him hunched over the computer terminals and asked if he needed help. "I'm looking for someone," Daniel explained, "but all I have is a first name and a story from 15 years ago." George adjusted his glasses. "Well, that's a puzzle. What kind of story?" Daniel hesitated, then told him about the letter. Not everything, but enough. George listened with the kind of attention that made Daniel think he didn't get many interesting problems to solve anymore. 15 years ago, George mused. That would be 2010. We have newspaper archives from that time. If she was involved in any kind of public custody case or bankruptcy proceeding, there might be records. Small chance, but possible. They spent that afternoon digging through old newspaper databases. Custody battles didn't usually make the news unless they involved someone famous or some unusual circumstance. Daniel's eyes burned from staring at the screen, scrolling through year after year of articles. Nothing. But he didn't give up. Step by step, Catherine had written. Small actions over time. He could apply that to this search too. Daniel created a post on the city's community Facebook group, carefully worded. Looking for someone named Catherine who lived near Riverside Park about 15 years ago. She left behind something important and I'd like to return it. If this sounds familiar, please message me. The responses came quickly, but none were helpful. Several Catherines who lived in the area now, but not back then. A few people asking what the something important was, probably hoping it was valuable. One person claiming to be Catherine, but asking for money first to verify her identity. Daniel deleted that message. He tried Reddit next, posting in the city's subreddit with the same basic information. More responses equally unhelpful. Someone suggested he was making it up for karma points. Someone else said this sounded like the plot of a movie. Daniel ignored them and kept searching. 3 weeks into the search, his brother asked him why it mattered so much. They were having breakfast at a pancake house, their new Saturday morning tradition. Daniel had told him about the letter early on, though not about the search. Now he explained. "This person saved my life," Daniel said. "They don't even know it, but they did. I was going to give up. On everything.
And then I found their letter, and it gave me a reason to keep trying."
I just want to say thank you." His brother was quiet for a moment. "What if you don't find them?" "Then I don't, but I have to try." His brother nodded slowly. "I get it. It's like when you reached out to me. I didn't know how much I needed that until it happened. Sometimes people don't know the impact they have." The conversation gave Daniel a new idea. What if Catherine's impact extended beyond just him? What if other people knew her story, even if they didn't know about the letter? He started thinking about the details in the letter differently. Catherine had mentioned a friend's couch, a friend who asked her to leave after 3 days. She'd mentioned a daughter and ducks at Riverside Park. She'd mentioned losing her job when a company went bankrupt. Company bankruptcies were public record. Back at the library, George helped him search bankruptcy filings from 2009 and 2010. There were dozens, but most were small businesses, not companies large enough to have multiple employees. They narrowed it down to 5 possibles. Daniel made a list of the companies and started searching for any former employees on LinkedIn. It was tedious work. Most of the companies were completely gone, their digital footprints minimal. But one, a small nonprofit called Haven House, had a LinkedIn page that was barely maintained. The organization had shut down in 2010, according to the last post on their page. It had provided services for families in crisis. Daniel's pulse quickened. That fit. Someone working there might have understood custody issues, might have been passionate about helping people in difficult situations. He found a list of former employees and an old annual report posted on the page. 14 names. None of them Catherine. His heart sank. Another dead end. But then he noticed something. The report thanked volunteers as well as staff. Another 12 names. And there, in the middle of the list, Catherine Winters, volunteer coordinator, Catherine Winters. Daniel stared at the name until it blurred. He had a last name. After weeks of searching, he finally had a last name. His hand shook as he opened a new search window. Catherine Winters and the city name. The results were still numerous but manageable now. He started going through them one by one. A Catherine Winters who was too young. Another who had died 5 years ago. A third who lived 3 states away and had never left according to her Facebook profile. Then he found something. A small mention in a community newsletter from 7 years ago. Catherine Winters awarded grant for youth photography program. The article was brief. Just a few sentences about a new initiative to teach photography to foster children, youth photography program. Catherine had lost her daughter. She'd hit rock bottom, and then she'd built something to help other kids going through the system. It fit. It felt right. Daniel searched for youth photography programs in the area. There were a few, but one stood out. Lens of Hope. Their website was simple but professional. The mission statement talked about giving at-risk youth a voice through photography, about teaching them to see beauty in the world even when life was hard. He clicked on the About Us page, and his breath caught. There she was. Catherine Winters, founder and director. The photo showed a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was surrounded by teenagers holding cameras, all of them smiling. The bio said she'd founded Lens of Hope 12 years ago after working in various nonprofits and volunteer positions. The organization had grown from a single class of 3 kids to a full program serving over 500 young people. They'd won grants and awards. They'd expanded to 3 other cities. Daniel read the bio 4 times. Then he looked at her photo again, trying to see the person who'd written that letter 15 years ago, trying to imagine her at her lowest point, sitting in that park writing those words. She'd made it. Not only made it, but thrived. The steps she'd written in that letter had worked, at least for her. Now came the hard part. Reaching out. Daniel spent an hour writing an email. He deleted and rewrote it a dozen times. Too formal, Too casual, too long, too vague. Finally, he settled on something simple and honest. Ms. Winters, my name is Daniel. About 2 months ago, I found a letter you wrote 15 years ago. You left it in Riverside Park and somehow it survived all this time. I was going through the worst period of my life when I found it, and your words completely changed my direction. I've been following the steps you wrote and they've helped me more than I can express. I wanted to reach out to thank you and to let you know that your letter is still out there helping people. If you're willing, I'd love to meet for coffee and return the letter to you. I think you should have it back. He included his phone number and hit send before he could second-guess himself again. Then he waited. 1 day passed. Then 2. Daniel checked his email obsessively, especially after his shifts. Nothing. Maybe she got hundreds of emails and his got buried. Maybe she thought he was a scammer. Maybe she didn't want to be reminded of that dark time in her life. On the 3rd day, his phone rang while he was washing dishes at the diner. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him step outside and take the call. Hello? Is this Daniel? A woman's voice, warm but cautious. Yes. This is Catherine Winters. You sent me an email about a letter. Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Yes, I did. I found it in Riverside Park. You wrote it 15 years ago. There was a long pause. I did write a letter like that. I'd honestly forgotten about it. It was such a long time ago. It helped me, Daniel said. More than you can know. Another pause. I'd like to hear about that. And I'd like to see the letter again if you still have it. I do. I've been keeping it safe. There's a coffee shop near my office, the Daily Grind on 5th Street. Would you be free tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock? Daniel had a shift at the coffee shop tomorrow at 6, but it ended at noon. I can do 10. Good, I'll see you then. The line went dead. Daniel stood outside the diner in the cold, holding his phone, barely believing what had just happened. He was going to meet Catherine Winters, the woman who'd written the letter that saved his life. That night, Daniel carefully placed the letter in a protective sleeve, the same plastic bag it had been in when he found it. He looked at the words one more time, words he'd memorized, words that had become part of him. Tomorrow, he'd return them to the person who wrote them, but they'd always belonged to him too, in a way. These words had built a bridge across 15 years, connecting 2 strangers who'd both stood at the edge and decided to keep going. He packed the letter in his bag and set his alarm. Tomorrow, he'd finally get to say thank you. Daniel arrived at the Daily Grind 20 minutes early. He changed his shirt 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple blue button-down that didn't look too formal or too casual. The letter sat in his bag, protected in its plastic sleeve, feeling heavier than it should. The coffee shop was busy with the morning crowd. Students with laptops, business people grabbing their orders to go, a book club meeting in the corner. Daniel ordered a black coffee he didn't really want, just to have something to do with his hands, and found a table near the window where he could watch the door. His mind raced through everything he wanted to say. Thank you seemed too small. Your letter saved my life seemed too dramatic. He'd rehearsed a dozen different opening lines and now all of them felt wrong. At exactly 10 o'clock, a woman walked through the door. Daniel recognized her immediately from the photo on the website, though she looked a bit older in person. Gray hair, kind eyes, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. She scanned the room, and when her eyes landed on him, she smiled slightly and walked over. Daniel? He stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his coffee. Yes, hi, thank you for meeting me. Of course. She sat down across from him, and up close he could see the lines around her eyes, the weathering that came from years of hard work and harder times. But there was something else there too. Peace, maybe. Or at least the absence of the desperation he'd read in her letter. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Catherine ordered a tea from the waitress who came by, and then turned her attention fully to Daniel. So, she said gently, you found my letter. Daniel reached into his bag and carefully pulled out the protected envelope. He placed it on the table between them. I found it 2 months ago, in Riverside Park under a bench. It was raining and I was cutting through, and there it was. Catherine picked up the envelope with trembling hands. She stared at it for a long moment before opening it and pulling out the letter. Daniel watched her face as she read words she'd written 15 years ago. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over and running down her cheeks. I can't believe this survived, she whispered. I can't believe someone actually found it. It found me on the exact day I needed it, Daniel said. I'd just lost my job. Third time in 2 years. I was facing eviction. My girlfriend had left. I'd pushed away everyone who cared about me. I was walking through that park thinking about how I'd failed at everything. Catherine looked up from the letter, her eyes still wet. And then I saw the envelope. Daniel continued. I almost didn't pick it up, but I did, and I read it, and it was like reading my own life written by someone else. Everything you described, I was living through the same things. What did you do? Catherine asked softly. I followed your plan. Every single step. I got a job washing dishes the very next day, started saving every penny, reached out to my brother who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, started learning coding in my free time, and I helped at least one person every single day, even if it was just holding a door or carrying someone's groceries. He told her everything, the diner job and then the coffee shop job, the hours of online courses, the reconciliation with his brother, the small acts of kindness that had become habit, the $2,000 he'd managed to save. I'm not out of the woods yet, he admitted. I'm still working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Still living in a too small apartment with heating that barely works. Still got a mountain of debt, but I'm moving forward now. I have a direction. And that's all because of you. Catherine was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. I never imagined, she said, her voice breaking. When I wrote that letter, I was in such a dark place. I didn't know if I'd make it through the next week, let alone 15 years. I left it in that park because I needed to believe my own words. I needed to make a promise to myself that felt real. Did it work? Daniel asked. Your plan? Catherine wiped her eyes with a napkin. It did. Not overnight and not in a straight line. But yes, it worked. She told him her story then. The grinding poverty of those first few months. Sleeping in her car after her friend asked her to leave. Working 3 part-time jobs, none of them in her field. The way she'd saved every spare dollar in a jar, watching it grow so slowly she sometimes wanted to give up. The hardest part was my daughter, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. I couldn't see her for almost a year. The court said I needed stable housing and steady income. Every step I took was about getting her back. Did you? Daniel asked. Catherine nodded. It took 14 months. 14 months of following those steps I wrote, of proving I was stable and capable. And then one day the judge said yes. Partial custody at first, then eventually 50-50. She's 23 now. She's an artist living in Portland. We talk every week. Daniel felt his own eyes getting wet. I'm so glad. The job thing was strange, Catherine continued. I took a position at a nonprofit, basically clerical work, way below my education level. But I loved it. I loved helping people. And I kept that job for 5 years while I saved money and volunteered with foster kids on weekends. That's when you started the photography program, Daniel said. Catherine looked surprised. You did your research? I had to find you somehow. All I had was your first name and a letter. She smiled through her tears. Lens of Hope started in my living room with 3 kids and 2 borrowed cameras. I used my savings to buy equipment. One of my volunteer kids from Haven House was the first student. She'd been through 10 foster homes and had completely shut down. But something about photography opened her up. She could express things through pictures that she couldn't say out loud. Catherine's eyes lit up as she talked about the program, how it had grown from 3 kids to 50, then to 500, how they'd gotten grants and donations, how they'd expanded to other cities, how they'd tracked their students, and 80% of them graduated high school compared to the 50% average for foster youth. Some of them have become professional photographers, she said proudly. Others just use it as therapy, a way to process their trauma. Either way, they're seeing the world differently. They're learning that beauty exists even in hard places. Daniel thought about his own journey, how Catherine's letter had helped him see possibilities instead of just obstacles. Your letter did the same thing for me, he said. It taught me to see differently. They sat in silence for a moment, the coffee shop noise fading into background. 2 strangers who'd never met, connected by words written in desperation and found in hope. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. Of course. Why did you leave the letter in the park? Why not just write it in a journal or keep it private? Catherine thought about this. I think I needed to release it somehow, to put it out into the world as a promise I couldn't take back. If it was just in a journal, I could ignore it or throw it away on a bad day. But leaving it there, hiding it where someone might find it someday, that made it real. It made it a contract not just with myself but with the universe. Did you ever think about it? Over the years? Sometimes, Catherine admitted. Especially in the beginning, when I'd go to the park with my daughter after I got her back. I'd wonder if it was still there, if someone had found it, if it had just rotted away. But eventually life moved forward, and I stopped thinking about it. Until your email. How did that feel? Daniel asked. Getting my message? Catherine smiled. Terrifying. That letter was from the worst version of myself. I wasn't sure I wanted to be reminded of that person, but also I was curious. You said it had helped you, and I needed to know how. I needed to know if the pain I went through meant something beyond just my own story. It meant everything to me, Daniel said simply. Catherine reached across the table and put her hand over his. Thank you for finding it. Thank you for following the steps. And thank you for finding me. You've given me a gift I didn't know I needed. What gift is that? Proof that pain can become purpose. That the worst days of our lives can plant seeds that bloom years later in ways we never imagined. I wrote that letter thinking only about my own survival. I never dreamed it would help someone else. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a weight he'd been carrying lifting slightly. What do you want me to do with the letter now? It's yours. Catherine looked down at the yellowed paper in her hands. I think you should keep it. It's as much yours now as it is mine. But maybe when you're ready, when you've climbed further out of your own hole, you could do something for me. Anything. Come talk to my kids, the teenagers in my program. Tell them your story. They need to hear from someone who's been where they are, who's followed these steps and seen them work. They need hope that feels real, not just words from someone who seems to have it all together. Daniel's throat tightened. I'm not sure I'm the right person. I'm still struggling. I still have so far to go. That's exactly why you're the right person, Catherine said firmly. Hope doesn't come from people who've already made it. It comes from people who are still climbing, but can see the progress they've made. You're living proof that these steps work, even when you start from the bottom. Daniel thought about this, about the teenagers who were probably where he'd been 2 months ago, about how much it would have meant to him to meet someone who understood. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Catherine smiled, and for the first time since they'd sat down, it was a smile without any sadness in it. Good. Come by next Tuesday evening. 6 o'clock. I'll introduce you to the group. They talked for another hour, sharing stories and discovering strange coincidences. They'd both lived within a few blocks of each other for years without knowing it. They'd both loved the same taco truck that had closed during the pandemic. They'd both found comfort in small, ordinary things during their darkest times. When they finally stood to leave, Catherine hugged him. Not a polite stranger hug, but a real embrace that said without words, I see you. I understand. We're going to be okay. Thank you, Daniel said into her shoulder. No, Catherine said. Thank you. Tuesday evening came faster than Daniel expected. He'd spent the days between the coffee shop meeting and now thinking about what he'd say to Catherine's students. He'd written and rewritten notes, then decided to just speak from the heart. The Lens of Hope building was in an older part of downtown, a converted warehouse with big windows and exposed brick. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early and stood outside for a moment, watching through the windows as teenagers moved around inside, setting up cameras and adjusting lighting. Catherine met him at the door with a warm smile. Nervous? Terrified, Daniel admitted. Good, that means you care. She led him inside. Let me show you around before we start. The space was amazing. Photography equipment lined the walls, from basic digital cameras to more advanced setups. Student work covered every available surface. Black and white prints and color photos capturing moments of beauty and pain. A portrait of an elderly woman laughing. A close-up of hands worn from work. A sunset through broken glass. They take these? Daniel asked, studying a particularly striking image of a girl looking out a rain-streaked window. They do. That one's by Rachel. She's been with us for 2 years. When she started, she wouldn't talk to anyone, just took pictures of empty spaces. Now look at her work. There's life in it. Catherine introduced him to some of the students as they arrived. Most were between 14 and 18, some shy, others more outgoing. They came from different backgrounds, different foster homes, different stories of hardship. But they all had something in common. They'd all known what it felt like to have life knock them down. At 6 o'clock, Catherine gathered everyone in a circle. About 20 kids showed up along with 2 other volunteers who helped run the program. Everyone, this is Daniel, Catherine said. He's here tonight to share his story with you. Some of you might relate to it. Some of you might not. But I think you'll all find something valuable in what he has to say. 20 pairs of eyes turned to Daniel. He took a breath. 2 months ago, he began, I was living in my car. The lie came out before he could stop it. Technically not true, he'd been facing eviction, but hadn't quite lost his apartment yet. But something about the way the kids were looking at him made him want to meet them where they were, to speak their language. He corrected himself immediately. Actually, that's not quite true. 2 months ago, I was about to be living in my car. I'd lost my job, couldn't pay rent, had pushed away everyone who cared about me. I felt like I'd failed at everything. He told them about finding the letter, about reading it in his cold apartment, about how it felt like someone was speaking directly to him across time. He told them about Catherine's 5 steps and how he'd followed them exactly. The first step was the hardest, he said. Get any job within 3 days. I had to put aside my pride, stop thinking about what I deserved or what my education qualified me for, and just get money coming in. I took a job washing dishes. He saw a few kids exchange glances. He knew what they were thinking. They were used to adults lecturing them about education and careers, not about washing dishes. Some people would say that was a step backward. Daniel continued, going from an office job to a kitchen. But it wasn't. It was a step forward because it was a step toward stability, toward having a purpose, toward being able to pay for food and rent. He walked them through each step, sharing his own experiences, reconnecting with his brother, learning coding, helping strangers, saving money even when it seemed pointless. I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything's perfect now, he said. It's not. I still work 2 jobs. I still live paycheck to paycheck. I still have bad days where I wonder if I'm going to make it. A girl in the front row, maybe 16, spoke up. Then why are you telling us this? If it's still hard, what's the point? Daniel appreciated the directness. Because 2 months ago I had no direction. No hope, no plan. I was drowning, and I didn't know which way was up. Now I'm still swimming hard, but I can see the shore. I know what direction I'm heading. And every day I'm a little bit closer. He pulled out the letter from his bag, still in its protective sleeve. This letter was written by Catherine 15 years ago when she was at her lowest point. She left it in a park, hoping maybe it would help someone someday. She didn't know if she'd survive her circumstances, but she wrote down her plan anyway. And it worked? Another kid asked. Daniel looked at Catherine, who was standing in the back of the room with tears in her eyes. Yeah, it worked. She got her daughter back. She built this place. She helps all of you. She turned her worst day into something that's still helping people 15 years later. The room was quiet. Daniel could feel them thinking, processing. Here's what I learned from this letter, he said. Pain doesn't have to be pointless. The worst moments of your life can become the foundation for something meaningful. But you have to make a choice. You have to decide to take steps, even small ones, even when you can't see where they're leading. He spent the next hour answering questions. Some were practical, about job searching and saving money. Others were deeper, about dealing with shame and rebuilding relationships. One boy asked how you know if you're making progress when everything still feels hard. You measure different things, Daniel said. Not where you want to be, but how far you've come from where you started. 2 months ago, I couldn't get out of bed most days. Now I'm working 2 jobs and learning new skills. That's progress, even if I'm not where I ultimately want to be. After the formal talk ended, several students came up to speak with him privately. A girl named Ashley told him she'd been in 9 different foster homes and didn't believe things could get better. A boy named Troy said he'd been thinking about dropping out of school because what was the point? A quiet kid named Chris just shook his hand and said, "Thank you." Catherine walked Daniel to his car after everyone left. You were amazing in there. I just told the truth. That's why you were amazing. They hear a lot of advice from people who've never been where they are. You've been there, still are there in some ways. That's what makes it real. Daniel thought about this. Can I come back? Not just to talk, but to help somehow? Catherine smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. We could use someone to teach basic computer skills, coding, web design. Most of these kids don't have access to that kind of education. If you're willing to volunteer a few hours a week, we'd love to have you. I'm in, Daniel said without hesitation. Over the next 3 months, Daniel became a regular at Lens of Hope. He taught Tuesday evening classes on basic coding and website design. He helped students build portfolios to showcase their photography. He became someone they could talk to about the practical realities of rebuilding a life from scratch. And something unexpected happened. Teaching others helped him as much as it helped them. Explaining concepts forced him to understand them better. Watching students progress reminded him of his own progress. Being needed, being useful, gave him purpose beyond just survival. His own life continued to improve in small increments. The coffee shop promoted him to shift supervisor with a raise. He completed 2 online coding certificates. His brother introduced him to a friend who was hiring junior web developers, and after an interview, Daniel got an offer to start part-time while keeping his other jobs. 6 months after finding the letter, Daniel met Catherine at the same coffee shop where they'd first talked. "I have an idea," he said, "and I want to know what you think." He pulled out a new letter he'd written. It was similar to Catherine's, but in his own words with his own steps. He'd sealed it in a waterproof container along with Catherine's original letter, carefully copied word for word. "I want to leave these in the park," he said, "not to replace the original, but to add to it. Maybe someone else needs to find them." Catherine read his letter, tears forming in her eyes again. "This is beautiful. But why include mine?" "Because yours started this. It's part of the story. And maybe someone needs to see that this isn't just one person's experience, that the steps work for different people in different circumstances." They walked to Riverside Park together on a Saturday morning. The weather was clear, the kind of crisp autumn day that made everything feel possible. They found a bench near where Daniel had found the original letter and carefully placed the new waterproof container underneath. Wedged into a spot where it wouldn't be immediately visible, but could be found by someone looking. "What do you think happens next?" Catherine asked. "I don't know," Daniel said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe it sits there for another 15 years. Maybe someone finds it tomorrow, but it's out there now waiting for whoever needs it." They sat on the bench for a while, watching people walk by. A young mother with a stroller, an elderly couple holding hands, a teenager with headphones lost in their own world. Any of them could be going through the worst day of their life. Catherine said quietly, "We never know what people are carrying." Daniel thought about that. 2 months ago, he'd been the person walking through this park carrying his worst day. To anyone watching, he just looked like a guy cutting through in the rain. They couldn't see the desperation, the fear, the sense of failure crushing him. "Thank you," he said to Catherine, "for writing that letter, for leaving it where I could find it, for meeting with me, for letting me be part of this." "Thank you for finding it," Catherine said, "for following the steps, for showing me that the worst day of my life 15 years ago still matters, that it's still helping people." A year later, Daniel was working full-time as a web developer. He'd found a better apartment, paid off most of his debts, and had a savings account that actually had money in it. He still volunteered at Lens of Hope every Tuesday, and he'd become close friends with Catherine and several of the students. He never knew if anyone found the letters they'd left in the park. They never got a call or an email from a stranger saying thank you, but that was okay. The letters weren't about getting credit or recognition. They were about planting seeds, about adding something to the world that might help someone somewhere someday.